Yeah, so thank you for being with us. And actually, with the advantage of YouTube, people that, if it's okay with you, people that are going to miss the conversation can watch it later on our YouTube channel. So,
fantastic.
Yeah. So I'll just say that, first of all, thank you to Michal that made the connection. And that apparently it's going to be the only conversation we have this summer. We have 9 different sessions each Wednesday with people from all over the world. We had from Brussels, we had from Germany, we had from Florence, really all over the place. But this is unique in the sense that this is in English, which is good, and gives us a little bit more a sense of being abroad and not being locked up in Israel.
Well,
So,
I'm flattered to be in such good international company, and I only wish that I could speak Hebrew well enough to have this conversation in Hebrew, but it's not. It's at the an Aleph level, so I apologize.
it's okay. So I'll hand it to Michal to lead the conversation, and because there's a small audience here, so Michal, whenever you feel it's appropriate, the people here maybe can jump in and ask a question or something.
Yeah, and I also suggest using the chat and raising hands and all that, and then we can incorporate it into the conversation. But Zack, you started us off with the last time we met, so I'll go to the first time we met.
Ah, okay.
Ah, and
I'm
see
not
if
sure
we
I
can
remember, but
jumpstart. Huh?
I'll see if I remember. Remind me of the story.
I'll tell you, you'll remember. I think we'll see, or I'll embarrass myself. But either way, we'll jump right in. If I remember correctly, the first time we met was like December, something like that, 2004.
Okay.
Sacramento. You were in AIPAC. I was fresh executive of the Federation in Sacramento. There was the annual lunch. And I was walking around all energetically placing cards on different tables. And you came and said, mm-mm.
That's right. Now I do remember.
Not an hour lunch.
An auspicious beginning to our relationship.
Right. So, but I wanted to jump back to your time at AIPAC and maybe start from there and then travel forwards and backwards and hear about your work in the States, how you got there, and then what you're doing now, and the relationship to Israel and the community here and the Israelis there throughout your career.
Yeah, sure. And if folks find that interesting, we can keep going down that path. But everyone has their own unique story, I know. But Michal, that was the beginning of our relationship, which only got better from there. That was the good news. It only got better from there.
It couldn't have gotten worse. It was.
Yeah, I had started at AIPAC in February of 2000. So this was 4 years into my stint. And I was running the Pacific Northwest of AIPAC. So AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, a political lobbying organization based in DC that lobbies for a strong relationship between the US and Israel. That's it, full stop, a strong relationship. And that's independent of different positions and policies that Israel takes. It lobbies on behalf of a strong relationship based in DC, and there are 10 offices around the country, around the United States. And I ran the office in San Francisco that worked from Central California up to Alaska. So I got involved because I did my junior year abroad at Hebrew University and fell in love with Israel, fell in love with the woman who became my wife and my best friends. And I played with the Hapoel Yerushalayim soccer team then. And I knew that this was going to be my life, working for Israel, with Israel, for the Jewish people. And I didn't know what that would look like. And I had a couple of interesting jobs after college, went to graduate school, studied philosophy, religion, and theology, got into politics, and started working at AIPAC. And when I started, it was February of 2000. And you'll recall, that was the moment when peace was about to break out, right? This is Barak and Arafat, and everything was wonderful, and the height of the Oslo peace process. And then within a few months, it all fell apart. Camp David didn't work out, and the Second Intifada was launched by September of that year, and everything from September of 2000 till today has been a little bit different. So I was at AIPAC working in those first few months. I can tell you that there were talking points that have been since locked in the vault, talking points for legislation that would have lobbied for the largest aid package in American history, for the biggest peace deal in Israeli history, and it would have had, you know, parameters that we've all now heard over and over again with some variation. And what's interesting is, having worked for AIPAC in the Pacific Northwest, which is a very liberal part of America, you know, it's kind of like Berkeley on steroids, and Michal can share a little bit more about what that looks like. But it was a time when everyone thought that AIPAC was this crazy left-wing organization, right? Because AIPAC was lobbying for what Ehud Barak wanted, which was, or not wanted, but was willing to take, which was division of Jerusalem, control of the Temple Mount to Palestinians, right? And everyone's like, AIPAC, you're a crazy left-wing organization. We were getting criticized from the right. Now, fast forward 20 years later, you have Trump in office and you have Bibi, and everyone thinks that AIPAC is a right-wing organization, again, because they don't understand the nuance, that AIPAC is about the relationship, and whoever's in power ends up shifting the relationship a little bit. But it wasn't for AIPAC to decide whether Israel pulled out of Gaza. It wasn't for AIPAC to decide whether Israel sells China the Falcon. It wasn't for America to decide whether Israel builds the fence, right? Like all that stuff. Israel decided, and AIPAC felt like, okay, America should support what Israel does. And now it's all very, very complicated because of Trump and because of Bibi, as we know. I worked that job until 2014, Michal, and then, no, 2013. Monique, my assistant, just joined, so she can correct me if I get any of the dates wrong. But I was recruited away from AIPAC to be the CEO of the JCC in Palo Alto. And I've really enjoyed it, but it's been a very different sort of job. And for me, I've wanted to make it about the future of Judaism and the future of Zionism. So that's what I'm really focusing on now at the JCC.
So tell us about the JCC. I have a memory with the JCC too. In my federation times, maybe 2004, 5, 6, when the construction or the dream of construction there started, I remember going to look at what a real JCC is going to look like coming from Sacramento. They told me they were very sad and stressed that they only raised like pledges for about $40 million or something at the time. And I went home thinking, with 10% of that, we can change all of Sacramento forever. Yeah. But it ended up being a lot more than that. And I think in the scale that's not familiar in Israel. So I'm slightly disadvantaged. I don't know where everybody on screen is from, and some people might be not from Israel. But can you tell a little bit about the JCC, what it's like, what was its vision?
Yeah.
From the start, yeah.
So the JCC started in basically someone's living room in the 1970s, right? And little by little.
This particular, wait.
The Palo Alto JCC, like, yes. You want me to back up and talk about the JCCs?
Maybe we can understand a little bit about the movement and what JCC have been.
Very good, because
right?
they're different
and
than
then zero into this particular one with its unique issues.
Yofi, that makes more sense, because they're different than the Matnasim, right? You know the Matnasim, and we have a great relationship with the Matnasim network in Israel, but the JCCs in America are different than the Matnasim in Israel. So the movement was started back in 1917, so just over 100 years ago. And it was started when all these Jews were emigrating from the old world to America. And the JCCs basically had to open up to help teach these Jews how to become American, teach them about American culture, teach them English, teach them how. So we joke that back in the old days, JCCs were about teaching Jews how to become Americans, and now, you know, JCCs are about trying to teach Americans how to be Jews, right? We're trying to infuse the Jewish into the American Jewish community, right? If your grandparents came to the JCC because they were Jewish, your grandchildren will be Jewish because they came to the JCC, right? That's the difference. But 100 years ago, they were really built to try and teach these new American immigrants who are Jewish how to be American. And evolved over the years, And when American Jews started to be able to be accepted into country clubs and athletic facilities, where for a long time they didn't allow Jews, right? You know this. So when the Jewish community started to be admitted in the 1950s and 60s, the ethos and the mission of the JCCs shifted a little bit. And now what you're seeing at the turn of the 21st century is a lot of JCCs searching for what their mission should be, right? Trying to figure it out. If American Jews can go and be a part of the YMCA in a way that they couldn't, and if they can go and join the local country club, why do you have a need for a uniquely Jewish space? So a lot of JCCs over the last 20 to 40 years have started to incorporate the non-Jewish community. And now with COVID, you have a question of what's the point of the JCC? Now we haven't, our JCC struggled with this, and I'll tell you why. But before I get into that, I'll just say there are about 180 JCCs in North America. That includes the United States and Canada. So about 180 of them. And they vary in size, and they vary in budget, and they vary in scope, as you might imagine. Some of them are in the cities. Some of them are in the more rural areas. Some of them have athletic facilities like ours that are huge. Some of them don't. Some of them have big theaters where they put on shows. Some of them don't. So there's not any single one mission of the JCCs, except that we are there to help try and build Jewish community, whatever that means. Right? Help bring Jews together, help them congregate, help them, and it could be their own micro community around their spin class or their boot camp class, right? That might be their community, or it might be about their Hebrew, they're taking a Hebrew class together, or it might be about those folks who come together and they like to watch shows and put on theater, right? So people who find common interests come together, and their micro communities are created at JCCs. One of the most important things we do, and almost every JCC in the country does, is we have a preschool. This is the before kindergarten, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, young 5-year-olds, right? So these families that have these young kids, they bring their kids to school and they learn how to do Shabbat, they learn the songs, they learn the holidays, they learn the festivals, and we hope that we get them on their Jewish journey, we launch them on their path, and that they make some of the best friends of their lives, right? Some of you probably make the best friends of your lives when your kids were going through school. Those families are still probably, in many cases, your closest friends. Now, as it comes to our own JCC, Michal is right. We have a new campus that's only 10 years old, that Michal was here when they were building it and raising money for it. It was completed in 2009 after a 10-year fundraising and construction effort where they ended up raising $300 million, Michal. It was $150 million for the JCC and another $150 million for the Senior Living Center. And so they're all together. This is what's unique about this JCC, and I think some of you may appreciate this, is that the Senior Living Center and the JCC are together. It's not like they just said, let's just take the seniors and put them off to the side and have the JCC here. It's actually a four-story campus. And
Danny, if you allow me to share or co-host me, I can pull up some pictures to show everybody. I've prepared those. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, but the seniors are now integrated in multi-generational living with the kids. So the little kids, the preschoolers, we send up to do Shabbat with them. It's like a big modern kibbutz, you know. But they raised $150 million to build this beautiful new state-of-the-art facility, and it still wasn't enough. Because you'll recall in 2008, the economy crashed, and they had to take out massive amount of loans, and we're still paying back $40 million of loans. So you can see there's an indoor pool, there's an outdoor pool. It's a big, beautiful campus. So this field, if you look at this, the one that's the second row, yeah, that's new. One of the things that I did when I came is there was no green space on campus. It was very concrete. It was beautiful, super modern, contemporary, but there was no green space for gathering because the community just ran out of money, right? $150 million is a lot of money, and they still didn't have enough, and they had to raise some with loans and bonds. So we completed this project to build this field, which is now used. That's an image of Yom Ha'atzmaut. By the way, the day that we get the most people on campus, 6 to 10,000 people, is for Yom Ha'atzmaut, right? We have 200 preschool kids, another 200 after school kids, 200 kids in camp. We get about 1,000 people that come to the gym every day. Our big theater can fit 400 people. These are impressive numbers. But when it comes to Yom Ha'atzmaut, 6 to 10,000 people come to celebrate. Part of that is because there are, somewhere between 30 and 50,000 Israelis living in Silicon Valley. You probably all know somebody or are related to somebody who lives out here. even if it's just for a short time, right? Because all Israelis come to Silicon Valley for 2 years. They're all coming for 2 years. They're going to go back.
Wait.
90% of them are still here. But Michal, you might have a question about that in the
No,
future. So,
yeah, well, I want to like reserve time to talk about the Israeli community and first.
okay, so I'll just say the following thing about the new campus, as Michal is showing off our beautiful campus. What I realized when I got to campus, as beautiful as it was, as it is, and as much as it's used for these incredible things like fitness, school, theater, celebrations, people had a transactional relationship with the JCC. Does that make sense? I don't know how to translate the word transactional, but you all have good enough English that if people came to work out and they left, or they came and they dropped their kids off and they left, they came to see a show and they left. And I wanted to create a space where people would hang out, right? It's a sociological term called the third space. Not your work, not your home, but that third space. Remember the TV show Cheers, where everyone knows your name? Remember when Norm would come in and everyone would say Norm? It's a very American show, but the reality is very few places now exist, and this is all pre-COVID, of course, because nobody's hanging out anywhere anymore, but people weren't hanging out, and that's how you develop friendships. So we built this space with a new cafe and a new playground for the kids and this new green space, and people were hanging out all hours of the day. People were hanging out, they were meeting people, and it allowed us to kind of really fulfill our mission, which is to build, to enrich lives, to build community, and to inspire Jewish journeys. That's why we exist as a JCC, to enrich people's lives, to help them build their communities, and to inspire their Jewish journeys, Jews and non-Jews. You know, if we can inspire a Jewish family or a non-Jewish family to observe a Shabbat, or if they're not Jewish, a day of unplugging, because being in the heart of the digital epicenter of the world in Silicon Valley, people are way too much on these things. And we need to unplug. It doesn't have to be an Orthodox Shabbat. It doesn't have to be a traditional Shabbat, but just the idea of unplugging. And I have so many stories of these families, these non-Jewish families that have come to tell me how great their family Friday night dinner is. And now they make homemade challah with their kids, non-Jewish families, because they love the tradition of starting to slow down for Friday night and unplugging on Saturday where they can actually just be with their family. How wonderful that Jewish wisdom and Jewish tradition can be infused in Jewish and non-Jewish families to make their lives better. And that's what we do at the JCC, Michal.
So we have actually somebody, Nurit, posted in the chat that also in the JCC in New York, there's many non-Jews. Is it so in Palo Alto? So you're describing, yes, a ratio, Jews to non-Jews?
So it's a very good question because everyone asks it, but we don't ask the question. We don't ask our members, are you Jewish or not? But I can tell you based on what we can assume that of our fitness membership, probably 3/4 are not Jewish.
Wow.
But the families in the preschool, the families obviously in the Hebrew school, the families in the camp, those are majority Jewish. Those are probably 3/4, they are Jewish. So it depends on the business that they are coming to do at the JCC, whether they're Jewish or not, for the most part. But everybody knows that this is a Jewish place. We have a mezuzah on the door. We have Jewish quotes. We don't shy away from Hebrew. Exactly.
So let's go to the other side, not the non-Jewish side, but the Jewish and Israeli. We know one of the things that's unique about Palo Alto, the Silicon Valley,
Silicon Valley, exactly.
California, that according to some estimates, there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of Israelis there. And many, as you mentioned, say, hey, we're just doing relocation, 2-3 years, maybe 5 until Moshe finishes school. Moshe was not born yet. All right.
Right.
So what does it look like on the ground? Trying to involve that community, what's done, why, etc. Yeah.
So my in-laws they're a couple that came in the 1960s for just my father-in-law's graduate school for 2 years, and of course they're still there. My wife was born in America, even though raised speaking Hebrew, going to Israel for Kaitana every summer. But there are probably, like, the Israeli consulate might inflate the numbers, but they say upwards of 50,000 Israelis here. Now, there's an interesting dynamic at play right now, in that it's kind of like two different philosophies. Those Israelis who are just hanging out with other Israelis and only speaking Hebrew and kind of want to have their own shtetl. And then those who want to make themselves part of the mainstream Jewish community, right? Our whole thing is the bridging. Yes, we have programs that are just in Hebrew. We have speakers. We have concerts. A lot of the Israelis who come here are like, wow, I could have never seen Hadag Nachash in such a small setting where it felt like you were right up close and personal, you know. We have Danny Sanderson. We have these incredible concerts that the Israelis are like, this is amazing. I couldn't be able to do this in such a small, intimate, wonderful place in Israel. And they feel like this has become a home away from home because there's the Hebrew programming. At the same time, we're trying to teach them about American Judaism. We're trying to teach them about the community at large. So we have a department at our JCC called the ICC, the Israeli Cultural Connections Department. And Michal knows the people there. Ronit Jacobs runs it, her old friend and colleague. And it started as a place to provide programming in Hebrew for the Israelis who are living here, whether temporarily or permanently. And it's morphed over the years so that it's become a way to try and integrate Israelis in the community. So we have a leadership program called Givanim that was started with the Federation, where Michal was, which is meant to teach Israelis about Bay Area Jewish life. And it's been so successful that we now have Israelis that are serving on the boards of other local Jewish organizations, including synagogues, right? They never would have. Most Chiloni Israelis don't know from or want anything to do with a synagogue, especially non-Orthodox ones, because they just don't know, right? It's just a lack of knowledge, as you know. Now, in Israel, the non-Orthodox movement is growing, so you're probably much more exposed to it. But I'll give you an example. The service that's taking place at the Namal in Tel Aviv, the one that's taking place at the
Kabbalat
Tachana,
Shabbat on the beach.
Kabbalat
Yeah.
Shabbat. That was started.
Tefillah Israeli.
That was started because some Israelis came to America and they saw what Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco, their Friday night Shabbat could be. And they said, we should have this in Israel, right? So exposing Israelis, whether they stay here or whether they go back to Israel, exposing them to American Judaism has become an important part of our mission. And vice versa. We need to infuse more Israeli Jewishness into American Judaism. So like when we were having a discussion about what sort of food our cafe should serve at the JCC, I said, it's going to be Jewish food, of course. And people are like, yeah, Jewish food, corned beef and pastrami and knish and liver. And half the community is like, what are you talking about? That's not Jewish food. I want falafel and I want hummus and I want Israeli salad, right? So that's also Jewish food now because that's the Israeli influence. So we have a cafe that now serves both those things unsuccessfully, by the way, because no JCC cafe is ever successful. But we have this opportunity. So I think that the future of Jewish life in America for sure, and maybe Israel, is about the infusion of the Israeliness, the Israelis who come here and share that with American Jews, and American Jews sharing with Israelis, look, there's a way to be spiritual, there's a way to be connected without having to be dati, right? And so if we're able to kind of bridge these two communities, which is what the great asset of having the Israelis in Silicon Valley are all about, Michal. Now, what's been interesting, I'll end with this, is what's changed is the following. We used to have this program in San Francisco called Israel in the Gardens. Israel in the Gardens was the big Bay Area wide, all across the Bay Area, a celebration of Israeli Independence Day. And, 15,000 Jews would come. Right, Michal? I mean, we had so many people that were coming. From Sacramento, they would come from all over. And it was just a cultural celebration. Nothing religious. It was kind of like Yom Ha'atzmaut, but it was very much using English terminology. It was Israel in the Gardens. And in the beginning, it was a lot of American Jews who were celebrating Israel because it was a place for taking a lot of pride in the heritage and the peoplehood and the things you know. Over the years, it became much more of an Israeli celebration of Israelis. So the Israelis were coming. So in the beginning, you might have an American Jewish rock singer, someone like a Barbara Streisand or a Neil Diamond. Not that we ever had the money to have somebody like that, but that's who we would have attracted, right, Michal? And by the end, we were having Hadag Nachash, and we were having the...
there was also like a shift in the time, right? Like in the morning, there'd be the American Jewish community come and watch their kids on stage and go to the booth and all that. And at 3 o'clock, there'd be Dag Nachash, Idan Reichel, Rita, all this. And the whole thing would shift. And all of a sudden, it became like Little Israel. Yeah.
Right. So it's very interesting in that we have now this kind of, these two schools of thought. The shtetl Israelis who are like, I'm just going to talk Hebrew and hang out with other Israelis. And those who kind of want it. The Israelis who put their kids in the tzofim, and the Israelis put their kids in the BBYO, American Jewish Youth Movement, right? And you can see these two different paths. It's an interesting dynamic that's happening.
Yeah, it's important to note maybe that Garin Tzabar, the program for lone soldiers in Israel, started in the Bay Area, probably before both of us, but started in the Bay Area because of that connection of the Israelis there to Israel, who were like, okay, we raise our kids there, but we want them to go to the army in Israel and have a real Israeli experience. And now it's in a lot of different places.
Yeah.
I have to, or I'd like to switch to today. A lot of what you're talking about is probably until beginning of March 2020. And then with Corona, what does it look like? Can you speak to that?
A balagan. It's a mess. The reality is we have over 10 business units at the JCC. Okay, you kind of heard me talk about fitness and preschool and camp and after school care and an arts program. The ICC I mentioned, a Jewish content department. We partner with organizations like Shalom Hartman and Binah to offer real content. We have a rentals operation, the cafe I mentioned, community engagement, which is doing like volunteer projects. All of them have had to basically shut. We shuttered them for 3 months, 90 days, because there was no gathering. We pivoted everything to online, to virtual. So our ICC, I'll give you all the link afterwards, but the ICC is doing a lot of work online with virtual programming with Israelis, all in Hebrew. But you can't do preschool online the way you can for older school kids, right? Theater doesn't have the same impact online. Obviously, fitness, some people are able to do a Zoom training with their trainers, but our whole business model was killed, Michal. You know, I had to furlough 90% of our staff. Wow. So now in the last 2 months, we brought people back. We were able to get one of these US government loans that hopefully will be forgiven, a small business association loan. We were able to raise some emergency funds from philanthropists in our community. So we've been able to reopen, but we've cut our budget by 1/3. We've gone down from a $30 million to a $20 million organization. We've had to cut, basically lay off 1/4 of our staff at least. It's been heartbreaking. Our whole arts and culture program, our whole department, we've had to suspend because people are not coming 300 people in a theater to watch a show, right? So why pay the money for that at this point? So it's been heartbreaking. And yet we just 2 weeks ago reopened our fitness operation, our gym, but we moved everything outside. You saw pictures of that big, beautiful green field. Because we're in California, we're able to have the benefit of putting it outside, and now people are starting to come and work out. We put the machines, 8 feet apart. People have to wear masks. We're wiping them down constantly. We start preschool in a week, and we need to make our budget to just break even. We need 200 kids. We have 120 signed up, right? Because parents are still a little scared, but that's not bad. We have to do them in groups of 12, but we're spending more money on teachers and more money on facilities cleaners and more money on the cleaning supplies than we can actually sustain. Oh, and by the way, the local public schools, they're not meeting live. They're meeting by Zoom.
Zoom, yeah.
So parents aren't able to go to work if they have to stay home with their kids. So now we've started a whole new program. Our after school program has become a full day, and we have to staff up for that and make sure the kids are socially distanced. And that's costing money, but it's providing a community service. So unlike the Matnasim in Israel, we don't receive any government funding, zero from the government. So it's all about what we can fundraise and what we can raise by charging people. So it was a really bad situation, I would say, for the first 90 days, for the first 3 months. And we've been able to turn it around, but we're still not making money. We're still not where we need to be. We're just hoping that over time, people will start to trust us and come back. So we did summer camp this summer. We were one of the only ones to do summer camp for 4 weeks, day camp, not overnight camp, kaitana, and we had no cases of COVID. So we think that gives the community confidence that they can come back and say, all right, JCC is doing it right. Everybody who comes to campus, they have to get their temperature checked. Everyone's wearing masks. It's probably similar in Israel, right, Michal?
Yeah.
And now the question is, what's the long term? We're looking at kind of what is the long-term future business of the JCC.
And do you hear the same from other JCCs across the country?
Absolutely. We talk all the time. I talk with my colleagues every week. I was just on a call yesterday with 20 different JCCs from around the country. and we're all struggling in the same way. You know, I think that what's interesting is the smaller ones that didn't have a big fitness operation, because fitness was our major revenue driver. They're struggling a little less because they're not out of that kind of resources, but they're smaller to begin with. So everyone's got the same sort of challenges. You know, I mentioned Bina earlier. I don't know how many of you know Bina, but
you can speak to it. Yeah.
Okay, we've had a partnership with them for a while, and they told us that they haven't been receiving government funding for quite some time. I mean, you might have the same situation at Hadarim, because government has been dysfunctional. They haven't been writing checks, right? And so you got to find philanthropists to make that up. But every JCC in America is facing something similar. I'm guessing that all of the arts and culture and learning institutions and institutions like Hadarim are also struggling right now.
So luckily, our financial budget is based on philanthropists and not on government money, which until the COVID I thought is not such a good thing, because there is government money for Israeli cultural centers, and now I think I'm lucky versus other places like Bina, which are heavily funded by the government and have a huge challenge right now. Definitely.
Yeah. We're saying the same thing, Danny, here, that we used to have an enviable business model in the nonprofit world, where 80% of our dollars, 90% of our dollars, were raised by people paying for fitness membership or sending their kids to school, right? It's a fee for service model, and only 10 to 20% is fundraised. And now the tables have turned.
Yeah.
What kind of sprouted this reconnecting, right? And telling Danny, oh, we should bring Zack, was an interview you gave to Makor Rishon.
Oh, yeah.
And you said there, and I'm happy to post the link in the chat for, it's in Hebrew, but to post it in the chat in a minute so people can read it afterwards. You said that it's now time for the state of Israel to help the Jewry of Chutz La'aretz, and that COVID is going to change that relationship. So can you speak more to this, how it was and what transition we may be witnessing right now as we're
You hit my sweet spot, Michal. This is I could talk forever about this. I love this. But that's the piece that Zvika Klein grabbed onto in the Makor Rishon interview. And I got a call from Reuven Pinsky as well about this, by the way. He's the minister in Israel, the Israeli minister of the National Service Program.
It spoke to me too. So,
I figured, because I remember an article that you wrote many, many years ago that got a lot of attention, Michal. We can talk about that later. But look.
That's when you interview me. Right now, you're on the spot, not that.
Okay. So look, I actually believe we are in the third era of Zionism, right? What we call Zionism 3.0, because it's Silicon Valley after all. But if Zionism 1.0 was the Herzl Zionism, right? Pre-1948, it was the Zionism of if you build it, we will come. It was the idea of this notion that Jews needed our own state, our own sovereignty to escape from the terrible anti-Semitism. Zionism 2.0 was the building of the state, right? From 1948, with the founders and the builders, and it was this notion that was defined by the following ethos, that you make Aliyah. As a Jew, you make Aliyah. And if you don't make Aliyah, if you stay in the Chutz La'aretz, if you stay in the diaspora, you have to support Israel fundamentally. You have to support Israel with money, diplomatically, financially, all these things, politically, but you have a stake without a say, right? It was this notion that, look, you didn't make Aliyah. Your kids didn't serve in the army. Your kids aren't being threatened with terrorist attacks. So you don't get to have a say, but we want you to have a stake. And what's happened, it was kind of that notion of the rich American uncle, right? The rich American Jews paid the way and then shut their mouth. And what happened in the last 10 to 20 years is many Americans, as you know, are saying, well, why don't we get to have a say? And I'm not necessarily agreeing with this framework, by the way, but many Americans are saying, if you want this to be our homeland, if you want us to have a stake, maybe we should have a say. And so let's have that conversation, right? It's this third era of Zionism where I think it has to be more symbiotic, the relationship. It's Americans having a stake in a different way in what happens in Israel, and Israelis caring a little bit more about diaspora Jews and not just feeling like, the Zionism 2.0 was about diaspora negation. It was, it wasn't the Ahad Ha'am notion like, okay, there's always going to be a diaspora and let's work together. It was this like, hey, come make Aliyah or support us or be quiet, right? I remember, at the AIPAC conferences, the prime ministers would come and half their pitch would be about making Aliyah. And I think we're in a different time now where we have a shared destiny. The Jews in Israel and the Jews in the diaspora recognize that we have a shared destiny, that we have, yes, a diversity of voices. This is not saying we all have to be, unified on the same page with the same voice. It's about unity, not uniformity, right? So we've started having these conversations and conferences over the last 5-6 years where we bring together the left and the right, the Orthodox and the secular, the Dati, the Chiloni. We're bringing them all together to have a conversation, Americans and Israelis, about how we can help each other, right? And over the last 70 years, diaspora Jews have been there for Israel financially. They've been there to boost with Aliyah numbers, to boost the yeshivot, to really support politically through the American political process. And now American Jewish communities are really suffering because of COVID. So I made this statement in the Makori Shon interview that maybe this is an opportunity for Israeli Jews to help diaspora Jews.
Do you have ideas?
The natural question is
specific?
how? What are the ideas?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So my favorite idea is exporting the Mechina idea to America, right? The Mechina notion, or even just the fact that all Israelis are serving in the military, right? The notion of national service. I would love for that to come and reach the American Jewish community. Right now, we're suffering from selfishness. We really are. I think that first, as Americans, I will say to this group that is not part of any press, Makori Shon or Haaretz or anyone else, I will say
But it is being recorded, so.
It's being recorded, that's fine. But I think Americans are suffering a serious bout of selfishness, which is why we have over 5 million COVID cases in America. We've become a crazy place where people overall are kind of like, I'm going to do what's right for me. And I think it's unhealthy. And I think we also have a situation where American Jews see the pinnacle of their Jewish journey as the bar bat mitzvah. And then they kind of go away from Jewishness. And maybe there's a Jewish wedding. Maybe they raise kids Jewish, right? And there's a lot of stuff being smashed into that space between the bar mitzvah and the wedding. A lot of good things like Honeymoon Israel and Moshe House and One Table. These are American birthright. A lot of great stuff happening in there. But if we could change what's normative in American Jewish thinking so that everyone takes a gap year. Every American Jew, just like the Mormons. The Mormons go on this missionary year when they reach a certain age. So when American Jews reach 18, if everyone took a gap year, and by the way, you could go to a study in yeshiva or you can go work in the Negev. You could work with the immigrants in the African immigrants in the Tel Aviv bus station, or you can work in the Arava. It doesn't matter, like Orthodox, secular, but like this idea of changing the way we think about the pinnacle of the Jewish journey to being a gap year experience. And then here's the key, Michal, is that Israelis are also doing something to come to America and experience American Judaism, right? Like not just the Shlichim or the Shinshinim, but there's a partnership. And I would love for Israel to export that to America, this notion of national service, this notion of a Mechina year. That's number one. Number two, I think that the Sochnut and some of these other organizations that have really tried to focus on finding financing in the diaspora to bring it to Israel programs can now look outward. And they're starting to. I mean, Bougie Herzog has had multiple conversations with the folks here about how they can start funding some more of these programs. But the agencies that are doing really good work, not just for Israelis living in America, but for American Judaism, we could use some funding help. There's some opportunity there as well. And then lastly, I would just say the partnerships for learning. I've mentioned, a few of them, Hartman and Bina, but I would love to continue this partnership with Hadarim. I think that there are other organizations out there in Israel that are doing wonderful things to promote a new way to think about Jewish. We talk about doing Jewish at the JCC, not being Jewish, but doing Jewish. Because in our mind, whether you're born from a Jewish mother or not, you can do Jewish. We have a Japanese woman on our board of directors. Okay, she is not Jewish. She did not convert. She married a Jewish guy. He could care less about being Jewish, right? Like, but she's the one who schleps the kids to Hebrew school. She makes Shabbat. She makes the Passover Seder. She is living a Jewish life, but she never officially converted, and obviously doesn't have a Jewish mother. So we talk about doing Jewish because in our mind, she's part of the mishpacha. She really is. So if we could import from Israel some great work and ideas and partnerships with Jewish organizations like Hadarim, I think it would really boost American Jewish organizational life that's become stale. It's become old. I mean, institutional affiliation is dropping. People are not a part of synagogues in America. People are not giving to federations. People are not a part of the old institutional life. They're starting up these cool little new organizations that are small. But for the most part, the old-timer organizations are dying off. And I think an infusion of Jewish energy from Israel and Israeli innovation can really change the American Jewish organization ecosystem. So those are the ideas I have, Michal. I'm happy to flesh them out with you further.
Something to think about, Danny, for us too.
Definitely.
Nurit posted, the problem is that Israelis that are secular think that Judaism by definition is orthodox and they don't accept the conservatives and the reform, and that kind of puts it in this is the synagogue I'm not going to, and harder to explore. I'll ask you one last question, and then I'm happy to open it up if people have questions from the audience, and you can ask in Hebrew or English, and we'll translate back and forth if there's a need. So, as a kid growing up, is that what you thought you were going to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I just want to address Nurit's question, which is, you're 100% right, Nurit, that for many Israelis, Orthodox Judaism is the authentic Judaism. So they may not be interested in doing it or going, they'll hang out outside the shul on Yom Kippur rather than going inside, right? But what we have to show Israelis is that non-Orthodox Judaism can be just as authentic, not watered down, right? Real Talmud learning, real belief in the way that we experience Shabbat by the spirit of the law, if not the letter of the law, right? There's things that we can do that can be seen as just as authentic, but we have a challenge. That's where we, who are not part of the Dati world, have an obligation. Now, Michal, look, did I think I would do this when I was a kid? No, I thought I would be an architect. I really did.
You're architect of the Jewish world, yeah.
Yeah, architect of the Jewish future. It's funny that somebody just said that to me, exactly what you just said recently, because our vision statement as the JCC is to be the architects of the Jewish future. So somebody said, see, now you really are the architect that you always wanted to be. I went to Yale, I got to college, and my first semester, I took an architecture class, and I dropped it. It was like, okay, maybe this isn't for me. But I ended up falling in love with it was really Israel. So I grew up as a very Reformed Jew, right? Very Chiloni. What we call in America H2O Jews. H2O is the symbol for water, H2O. But H2O is also high holidays only, HHO, high holidays only. Meaning I only went to synagogue on the high holidays. I had my bar mitzvah, and then I had to choose between continuing with my Hebrew studies or playing soccer. I chose soccer. It was, not a tough choice. Now, my parents were very Zionist. They led the first BBYO teen tour to Israel. That was an international tour with American kids and British kids and South African kids. So they were very Zionist. And we used to do kind of our own Shabbat dinners, but we were not religious at all. And then I took that first trip to Israel when I was a teenager, basically like the birthright thing. And I fell in love with Israel. And I saw, okay, being Jewish for me is not just about what you can't do. Because my dad is like a traditionalist. Even though we weren't religious, we would not have pepperoni pizza in the house. They're like not kosher because we'd have pork at the local Chinese restaurant, but we couldn't bring it in the house, right? He wouldn't let us own a German Shepherd because of issues with German, right? Like that was his generation. He, Oleva Shalom. He was like, you couldn't go to school dances on a Friday night. We weren't Shomer Shabbos, but like I couldn't go to a school dance on a Friday night because it was Friday night. So, and then I went to Israel my first time, and I said, oh, Judaism is not just about what you can't do. It's about what you can do. There are tall Jews on the basketball team who can slam dunk a basketball. You can grow tomatoes in the desert, right? Jews can look amazing in a uniform with a rifle. Like, okay, like I got inspired that these are my people too. This is my tribe. This is my family. And so I think that that's what started it. And then really when I went abroad my junior year at Hartzell Mount Scopus, Michal, that's where I realized this is what I was going to do. So it didn't happen until I was probably my junior, senior year in college. And even then, I didn't know what form it would take. You know, my first job was taking kids to Israel and then I did that for a couple of years before graduate school and then politics. And I just feel blessed. I feel blessed to be doing the work that gives me personal fulfillment, that enables me to talk to and meet incredible people like you. And God willing, it continues. Now, I was also lucky enough to meet and marry an Israeli girl. So my kids, you know, go to Israel every summer. They have Israeli grandparents. They speak Hebrew better than I do, right? That's been part of it.
Yeah. Thank you. We have Neely raising a hand, and also Nurit had a question. So let's go Nurit first. I see you're unmuting, and then Neely, and then anyone else. You can put your name in the chat, and then we'll be able to call on you or raise your hand.
Perfect.
Nurit, go.
Okay, אז תודה רבה על השיחה המעניינת מאוד שלך. אני רוצה, יש לי שני ילדים שחיים בארצות הברית, אחד בניו יורק ואחד בלוס אנג'לס, ורוב הנכדים שלי גדלים או נולדו בארצות הברית. ואחד הדברים שאני רואה אצלם זה באמת, ולכן גם אמרתי את מה שאני אמרתי, זה שאין מעורבות בכלל עם הקהילות היהודיות, לא בלוס אנג'לס ולא בניו יורק. והבעיה, בלוס אנג'לס עוד יש קהילה ישראלית, אבל בניו יורק בכלל אין קהילה ישראלית. ואחת הבעיות שאני רואה, זה לא רק מה שכתבתי, איך הבת שלי אמרה, אנחנו חילונים אורתודוקסים, כי לדעת היהדות שלנו, אנחנו חושבים שהיהדות היא אורתודוקסית, אז הבעיה היא עוד, שבניגוד לקהילה היהודית בארצות הברית, הקהילה הישראלית לא מרגישה מיינוריטי, היא מרגישה majority, כי הם באו מישראל. וזו הסיבה לטעמי, ואני חושבת שכבר יש מחקרים על זה, שהבנים של הישראלים מתבוללים הרבה יותר מהר מהיהודים. כי הם מיד הולכים ל-majority groups, ולא הם לא במיינוריטי, אז הם לא הולכים להילל האוס, נכון? וזה מאוד, ובאמת נשאלת השאלה, איך לחבר ישראלים, איך לחבר את הישראלים לקהילות היהודיות. כי הרעיון שלך להביא אנשים צעירים לארץ זה רעיון יפה מאוד, אבל להביא ישראלים שיתמעו, או הישראלים שיתמעו בחברה היהודית האמריקאית, כי אני חושבת היום שהתרומה ליהדות של החברה האמריקאית והסקולרס, האמריקאים האקדמיים, היא הרבה יותר גבוהה מאשר מה שהיום האוניברסיטה העברית ותל אביב וכדומה נותנים במדעי היהדות ליהודים. ויש לנו בהחלט, לאף אחד מאיתנו אין עגלה ריקה ואנחנו יכולים ללמוד משהו. וזאת היא השאלה, איך מקרבים את הישראלים ליהודים האמריקאים.
Let me translate a little bit. Or summarize at least. So Nurit was telling us that she has two children in the US, one in New York, one in Los Angeles, and most of her grandchildren born in the US and living there. And I want to say to Nurit, my heart is with you. Some of my kids are in the US, and it's especially hard at this time right now. But her concern right now is that unlike the Jewish community in the States that has maybe an attitude or comes from a place of awareness of being a minority, the Israeli community doesn't feel like a minority because they come from Israel where they feel like a majority. And so there's studies or opinions that the children of the Israelis in the US assimilate much more because they're used to being part of the majority, and so they feel comfortable with the majority group. I don't know if the because is a because, but I know it's a phenomenon that's discussed. They don't go to Hillel House on campus. And the question is how to connect the Israelis to the Jewish communities, because the idea of bringing youngsters to Israel is fantastic, but also how to bring Israelis to the Jewish American communities.
Yeah.
And how to bring them close. And I know from my experience that it's a huge question, especially since the Israelis abroad come with a mindset, usually, I'm not saying everybody, but usually they come with the mindset that they're just there for a short time. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, maybe 10. All of a sudden it's 20 or 30 or 40. And then it's very late in the game. And I know it's a huge challenge, and we'd love to hear your thinking on it.
Yeah, it's a very important question, a big challenge. And I know it very, very well. What's interesting is, I'll tell you a quick story, and then I'll try to answer. When I was growing up as an American Jew, third generation American Jew, one of my two closest friends were these Jewish guys, and one of them really did nothing Jewishly, would eat a ham and cheese sandwich on Yom Kippur. And I'm being literally would eat a ham cheese sandwich on Yom Kippur after he got back from synagogue. Like, he went to synagogue because that's what you're supposed to do, but it didn't mean anything to him. And when he started dating a non-Jewish girl, his father lost his mind. His father was like, how could you? And I always said, like, his father never taught him that being Jewish or doing Jewish mattered. Like, it wasn't important. So how could you judge him, right? So I share that story with you because I hear over and over and over, Nurit, the stories from the Israelis in our community, that's your generation, who only when their kids say, what do you mean I'm going to have a bar mitzvah? What do you mean you want me to go to the IDF after? What are you talking about? Like, their parents are like slapped in the face. They never knew it hit them. They just assumed that, of course, their kids would know that they're Jewish or Israeli. And when their kids are like, no, Ma, I don't feel Jewish. I never went to synagogue. You never had us do Shabbat. I don't even know what you mean from a bar mitzvah. And I'm not going to do the IDF because all my friends, they don't get it until that moment when their kid slaps them in the face with this new news. So the answer is trying to get the Israelis to understand that they should be a part of this greater American Jewish community before it's too late, before their kids are grown up, right? So now that's what we try to do every single day by trying to break down this Israeli shtetl that I talked about, right? Because when I ask American Jews, is it important for you to marry, for your kids to marry someone who's Jewish? A lot of them will say yes. Some of them will say no. But a lot of American Jews will. When I ask Israelis in Silicon Valley, is it important for you to have your kids marry someone who's Jewish? They say no. I'd like them to marry someone who speaks Hebrew, maybe.
I don't think they even understand the question you're asking.
Exactly. It's true, Danny. It's true.
Exactly. No, for sure.
Right. So it's a matter of helping this is why I'm saying this exchange of ideas and people, having Israelis come to America to understand American Judaism. There's a way to do this without being orthodox, without being dati, that is authentic, right? And that we're part of this mishpacha, this tribe that's bigger than just Israelis or American Jews. But we have to have each other. I don't like the word bridge. We don't have a good word. There's no language is a real challenge, by the way, as you know, because thank you, Michal, for translating. I understood, Nurit, about half of what you asked, but I'm glad
I could speak in English. I thought you understand Hebrew.
No, my Hebrew you're very elementary, but I'm glad because bridging is not the right word. Just like there's no translation for chiloni, right? It's not secular Judaism in the same sense. So when we bring Israelis here, or when they come here, they need to experience authentic American Judaism that's not dati and feel like, oh, I get it. This is good. And vice versa. Americans have to go to Israel and experience Israel beyond the occupation and the Rabanit. The two issues that American Jews have problems with, okay, fine. Occupation, Rabanit, but let's put those aside and deal with all the other great things that Israel has to offer, right? And yes, we'll talk about the occupation and the Rabanit, fine, but these are the authentic experiences that we as leaders in the Jewish community have to help others experience. Otherwise, it will come to the kid going, I don't understand what you mean. You want me to have a bar mitzvah? We've never gone to shul before. Now you want me to have a bar mitzvah? Doesn't make any sense.
Zack, I don't think you will convince my kids, for example.
They live in an Orthodox community? You were saying that in...
No, they're living... my daughter in New York lives by herself, and her friends are immigrant like her from different countries, and Muslim and Buddhist, whatever. My son, who lives in Los Angeles, he lives completely in an Israeli gestalt.
Right.
ghetto. I mean, they send their kids to Israeli kindergarten. The kids don't speak English till they go to school, even if they were born in the States.
But
But,
Nurit,
you
this is
know,
not unique to Israelis. Americans are facing the same
I
challenge where their
know,
kids,
I'm
kids
not
are like,
concerned about the Armenian who comes to the States. But no, one of the obstacles that I see is that in Israel, to go to school, to shul, to synagogue, you don't have to pay money.
yeah.
And Israelis will not pay money to join a synagogue community. And I don't know if you understand it.
Totally understand it. Because the next generation of American Jews won't either. By the way, the 30s and 40s American Jews won't pay money either. But even deeper than that, Nuri, even deeper is we have to make sure that our kids, your kids, my kids, understand that Judaism has something meaningful to give them, right? Unless they understand that Judaism has something meaningful and relevant and joyous to give them, then it's lo ichpatli. They don't care. It's like, oh, I learned how to do, Ima, I learned meditation. Oh yeah, what kind of meditation? Buddhist meditation. Well, did you know that the Jews also have been doing meditating for, thousands of years, whatever? Like, there's no recognition that our heritage has something really special to offer. So our kids are turning to Burning Man, right? They're turning to a soul cycle class to get that fulfillment and that enrichment that the Jewish ethos can give them, but they don't know it because it's inaccessible, or it costs money, or they're intimidated, or they don't want to go to a rabbi or a Chabad. For whatever reason, there's barriers to entry. And so they're not gaining the knowledge that we have.
How do you break it?
Yeah, I think like some of what you're saying is, how do we explain the Israelis about this? But I'm wondering, this is the usual me being the bad guy. I'm wondering if there's things in the American Jewish community, for example, I have felt when I was there, I have felt that there was a part of American Jewish community that loved Israelis in Israel.
Yeah.
They should be cool, and with, the girls should have a gun, and they should do all these things, grow things in the desert and all that. But not in America. You're not supposed to be here. And then the fence is a little bit, again, you said about vocabulary. I'm not sure offense is the right word, but that David Grossman said, kissing through glass.
Yeah.
That glass wall is from both sides. It's not just the Israelis that don't get it. It's what Nurit is saying. If there was like a sal klita, like for absorption, right? That people come here. But it's like, it's not lo chuki. It's as if it's not okay for Israelis to be in the US. And then we can't accept them and absorb them into the community. We can't say, for the first year, don't pay tuition. For the first year, don't pay membership. For, whatever. We'll do your bar mitzvah for free. Just come. Right. So the wall keeps. So I'm wondering what can be done from both sides.
You're 100% right. We need to be strong and confident and tear down the walls.
And
as institutions,
be excited about our Judaism too. Like the American Jewish community, not always excited about its Judaism. It's going to sell.
I'll tell you, I wanted to do something when I first got to the JCC. I wanted to start a Shabbat truck. Where I would, food trucks were a big thing for a while here. The food trucks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I wanted to take a Shabbat truck to a different technology company every Friday afternoon. Yahoo and Facebook and Google, they're all here. And I wanted to give out free chalot and these little cell phone sleeping bags. Like, just put your cell phone in a sleeping bag for the, and people are like, that sounds like it's Chabad. It's secular Chabad. And I'm like, yes, exactly. And guess what? It works. Chabad works for a reason, right? Like, why criticize that? But if we can expose to our kids who are Jewish and their friends who aren't Jewish, the beauty of Judaism, right? Like, just take the calendar year for an example. Every month of the year, there's another holiday that is so special. And if we can translate that holiday to a universal value, whether it's Tu B'Shvat and the trees and make it about environmentalism, whether it's Sukkot and make it about gratitude and tikkun olam and doing good. And our kids can work at the local homeless shelter or soup kitchen, right? If it's Tisha B'Av, about the opportunity to just stop and reflect on all that has happened that's been horrific in the world, right? Like each of our holidays has something to say that's meaningful. And it doesn't have to be going to shul and fasting and davening for 10 hours. It can be done in a secular way that's authentic, that helps our kids understand that Judaism has something to say. In this moment of COVID, it's even more important. This is Judaism's golden moment, right? If we can't tell our kids that Judaism has something to say about what happens in these panic moments, then we've lost, and we will lose them.
Dani is waving at me, but Neely had her hand, so
maybe Neely's could be the last question.
Neely, and unless somebody has some burning issue to raise, and then we'll close. Neely?
Maybe she raised the hand by mistake.
Yeah, נכון. זה היה טעות.
Okay.
אין בעיה.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Please.
Okay. Do you know Julia, who used to be a police officer?
No.
No, okay. She's from the Bay Area, and she works very hard for the communication between Israelis and American Jews. Okay. So,
It's
you
a
know,
small
Israeli
world,
always try to find out if you know someone that they know.
I'm sure I know someone who knows her, but it's a small world, but maybe not that small. All right. Well, this
Can I say final words, Michal?
Dani, please. Bakasha.
No.
Thank you. It was very inspiring, really, truly. Thank you very much. I don't know personally the West Coast Jewish community so well. I spent a few years in Baltimore and a few years in Providence, Rhode Island, and it was a little different. Not so many Israelis. From my perspective, you reach out to Israelis more than a lot of other places in the United States. And from my impression, you do an amazing work there, and it's so important. And I agree so much with you about the fact that the future of the Israeli, of the American congregation, Jewish American congregation, is not in the synagogues. It's in different worlds, and I feel from what I heard from you that you're really trying to think about what's next. How are we going to face the challenges of the future? So really, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Let's do it together, Dan.
Michal,
we'll think about the challenges biyachad.
Yeah.
Bezrat Hashem. I mean, you threw us a kfafa, a glove, like you threw us something to pick up, and we can continue discussing.
So I already want to tell you one thing, that I'll be very happy to give you some of my time, of my personal time. If you have a group that want to talk with someone in Israel and hear a little bit about what's going on here, I'll be more than happy. And really, thank you very much.
But also, we do classes from that you can share. Yeah.
Dani, what do you think about the idea that I can give Zack JCC tours from the couch in Israel?
So we have a program. So we have a program that Nurit is leading. She's a very well-known tour guide in Israel, and we have an excellent program that people come to Zoom and walk with her in different cities in Israel, Tzipori and Caesarea, and wow.
Very cool.
Think about it for your community.
I will. Sounds like a great idea.
Maybe it can combine Israelis and Americans, Jews, and other people.
Sounds like a really great idea. Let's be in touch.
Think about it. I'm willing to do it.
Thank you.
And thank you, Monique,
for
making
much.
the connection.
It was a huge pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Laila Tov.
Thank you very much. Laila Tov.
Thank you. Laila Tov.